Well, today is the second Sunday of the season of Epiphany. And Epiphany, we know, just simply means showing or shining forth. And so it follows then that during Epiphany, we consider God's radiance and glory. And we open our hearts to experience God's light. Epiphany's journey is guided by that star, that holy light, the light of God, that shone over and through the infant Jesus. This theme of light and light's identification with the essence and presence of God is a theme throughout the entire Scriptures, as well as in the thoughts of all the world's religions. Testimony, perhaps, that this divine light, what we experience as light and enlightenment, is at the heart of all that is. As we've done through the Sundays of Advent and Christmas, we heard this morning the voice of God through the prophet Isaiah, who says this: "Thus says God, the Holy One who created the heavens and stretched them out." In other words, this isn't just some God. This is the God who spoke light into being. "I have called you and have taken you by the hand and kept you. I have given you as a covenant to the people, as a light to the nations, to open eyes that are blind, to bring out from the prison those who sit in darkness. My glory, my light, says God, I give to you." Through the prophet, God speaks hope and liberation and light, not just to any people at any time, but to the people of Israel who are in the darkness of exile. There's a backstory here, and it's one that I'll give you the short version of, just so you can kind of empathize and see the plight of the people to whom Isaiah writes. Now, you'll remember that God and Moses delivered the people of Israel from bondage in Egypt, made a covenant with them, brought them through the wilderness to the promised land, and there they became a nation. They built a temple to Yahweh, the deliverer who had set them free. They stayed there. Over the course of hundreds of years, the nation of Israel celebrated victories and suffered defeat. They went through prophets and kings when they had forgot where they came from and left God behind. These cutting voices of prophets called them to return to the ways of love and justice. Then fast forward, 600 years before the birth of Jesus, disaster fell when the Babylonian army took Israel. The temple that was the center and foundation of their faith, was destroyed to the ground, and the people were taken out of that promised land and into exile. So their whole cultural, political, and religious nation was devastated. And God, as far as they could see, did absolutely nothing to stop it. Israel, it seemed, had been abandoned by God. The temple was gone. There were different people in their promised land. Who were they now? And what about their God? With time in exile, and distance from their land to reflect, they decided for themselves that the reason for their defeat was that they themselves had turned from God's ways. So alone, far from home, no center for their faith, entered the prophet Isaiah, to help them remember who God is and who they, as God's people, are to become. God, Isaiah announces, is sending another liberator like Moses, a servant liberator. This God, not only the God of Israel, but the God of all creation, will send someone to bring hope and justice, and will call God's once defeated people to be a light not only to themselves and their people, but a light to the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out from the prison those who sit in darkness. They were in prison themselves. And yet God was calling them out to be the light and liberation for the nations. Isaiah assures this exiled people that God had not forsaken them, but is even now shining holy radiance on them, restoring them, warming them, preparing them to be the light. The prophet proclaims that the darkness of despair has actually been lifted, that the light has come at last. Light. Science, of course, has shown us that we need darkness. We need darkness to sleep. We need darkness to renew. But we need light to live. Physical light and spiritual light. Some of you may, like me, struggle with that, I suppose, it's kind of the first world malady that we call seasonal affective disorder. Anybody else have that? A couple of us, yeah. We need light. We need brilliant light, warming light. Without it, our mood is dulled. We feel down, dampened, even depressed. Even if we don't diagnose ourselves with this modern syndrome, all humans respond positively to light. We need it. From brilliant sunlight to fireworks and the celebrated lights of Christmas. Our hearts are lifted with light. We're captivated by desert skies teeming with stars and find moonlight romantic. We have an inherent attraction to light. And so our spiritual terminologies use the metaphor of light as we attempt to communicate what God does in us, those holy encounters of our lives. We speak of the spark of the divine that ignites human beings, that spark that we recognize in each other as the brilliance and wonder of God. We talk about enlightenment as spiritual insight and transformation. Now, darkness and light almost universally symbolize negative, positive polarity. And so we have to give ourselves, I have to give myself a caution. We need to use care and be clear that we're speaking about light that is illumination rather than light that is pigmentation. Get it? Therefore, we don't equate blackness with evil and whiteness with goodness. We know all too well where this can lead us. So we need to be clear that we're talking about light that is illumination and dark that is the absence of illumination, not black and white. Light is spiritual metaphor in most of the world's religions. In Buddhism, Buddhas are often portrayed, you've seen them, with halos of light or flame over their heads as a sign of enlightenment and the inner light that radiates within them. The Jewish Sabbath is celebrated, begun with lighting of candles, the bringing of the light of God into the space at the table. And the light burns in every synagogue in the world. Hanukkah, of course, is celebrated as the festival of lights. In Islam, Sufi teachers teach about the radiance that appears when the light of heaven is manifest in human beings. Jesus' face shone as the sun as he radiated the inner light of God. And we use light. We light candles when we want to invoke the Spirit. Our Quaker friends speak of the inward light. Now, there's a difference here. Quaker friends speak of the inward light to reflect Christ's light shining on them. And the inner light to express the spark of the divine, something of the light of God that is in all of us. And so we have the inward light and the inner light of Christ. And the Quaker understanding of community is that not only can individuals be guided by the light, but in the gathering of the people of God, God's light is realized profoundly together. Images and experiences of light recur throughout the scriptures, from Genesis creation stories when God said, "Let there be light," and the revealing throughout the Old Testament of God's shining brilliance, God's glory, the Shekinah light of God. From the theophany of the burning bush that spoke to Moses, to the psalmist's declaration that God's word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. Light announces, symbolizes, and exhibits the presence of God. Isaiah speaks of salvation as the dawning of light. And we know that Epiphany star leads magi and shepherds to the birthplace of Jesus, who was then himself called the light of the world. Jesus said, if anyone follows me, they shall not walk in darkness, but they shall have the light of life. One of the most dramatic light encounters you'll remember was Paul's experience, who was Saul, his experience on that road to Damascus. Paul met the blinding light of Christ. And then he had an inner enlightenment, an inner clarity that came upon him. So what do we mean? What exactly do we mean that God is light? And that we long for the light of Christ, or even that we've seen the light. What do we mean? I think we mean that what light is, physically, God is, spiritually. What light does, God does. Here's some examples. First and foremost, light reveals. We can see each other this morning because of one thing, because there's light in this space. Light enables us to see things that have always been there, but we can't see until the light is turned on. And so light, God, reveals reality, spiritual reality, personal reality, inner and hidden realities. With God's Spirit in us, we can see what is right and what is good and where we are to go. And so that's the second thing, that the light of God guides us and lights the path before us. My friend Doug recently changed pastoral jobs, but it wasn't easy for him. You see, he knew that his work at the church he had served for 5 years was drawing to a close. But he had this deep inner conflict about leaving without solving some key problems that the congregation was experiencing. And so he agonized for months until, through tears of hopelessness, he cried out for God to shine the light and show him the way. He describes his experience as a sudden lifting of a shroud of confusion. The light dawned, and he saw the way that had been so murky, clear now in the light of God. Light is a source of energy. Likewise, the Spirit of God gives us whatever it takes for us to live in love. God's light shines on us and confers energy and zeal for living and hope and wonder. The light of lasers, we know, can cut and mend. This is the most profound and hopeful application of light to God's ways in my own life, this Epiphany. When I feel that a deep wound in my soul is gaping and bleeding, when I worry that a cut in my heart will never heal, I imagine the holy laser of God's love, searing the edges, stopping the bleeding, touching those tender, injured places with healing light. Light is a guide by which we can measure things. Light is straight, right? So you shine it, and it has one direction, that is a straight line. Anything then that veers from that direction of God's light maybe isn't aligned with love. Light's energy and warmth produces growth and health. We know this because of the light of the sun. God's light also imparts life. It activates, it quickens, revives, and produces growth in us. Today we celebrate, as I said before, the baptism of Jesus. And you heard the reading that at Jesus' baptism, the Spirit of God descended on him like a dove. A dove, another image, like light, for the presence of God, the radiant presence of God. There's a story in kind of the extra-biblical readings about Mary that says that the dove appeared to Mary with radiance coming out of its wings. And the archaeologists have even connected these signs of light and the dove when they've excavated oil lamps, sources of light, in the shape of doves. Clearly there's a connection, the coming of the light, the coming of the Spirit. Jesus emerges from the waters of baptism as a light that darkness cannot overcome. In an echo of Isaiah's description, Jesus becomes a light to the nations. He too heals and guides, shows us the way by the light of his life, and warms our hearts with the love of God. Last week, some of you may have read, I wrote in the chimes these words: darkness is a reality. Darkness that covers the earth and sometimes us. Shadows come between us and light and can bring malaise and even depression. But the light of God is promised to arise upon us and through Jesus to actually shine in us. But I often miss the light of God. My attention gets diverted by the looming shadows, by the troubles and conflicts and suffering of life. And I simply don't look for it. Or I dismiss it. Or I fail to turn towards God's goodness and brightness. This Epiphany season is wooing me. And I hope it's wooing you as well to the light. To look for it, to seek it, to notice it in others and in my own life and all around us. And then to find it and stand in it. I want this light of God to shine on me and on us. And I want to reflect it, and I want you to reflect it, so that others will see it and want to stand in it too. If God is light, and the light of God can guide us in the ways of love and hope, if God's light enables us to find our way, to perceive rightly, and to feel the warmth of life, if that holy radiance can incise all that is harmful from our lives, can energize us with holy fervor and the joy of life, can show us the details and depths of life's meaning and beauty, then I want it. And I'm sure that you do too. How do we invite this light? What keeps us from living each day in it? Sometimes I think we simply forget to appropriate time to seek it and to bask in it. So unaware of our tendency to shut out the light, we do without. We stop seeking. We resign ourselves to the discomforts of darkness and settle into our ways without realizing that we're sitting here in the darkness of our souls. When we invite the light of God to shine on us, to fill us, to energize us, to mend us, and to light our paths, this light will illuminate us, make us radiant. Jesus tells us that we, like him, are the light of the world, echoing the essence of that message of Isaiah to the exiled people of God. Those who felt hopeless and overwhelmed heard, I'm giving you as a light to the nations. May we hear that again this morning. The question is, won't you come to the light? Contemplate it, invite it, bask in it, watch for it to guide you. Be still in it, so that the very light of God can heal our souls. May it be so. Amen. Well, today is the second Sunday of the season of Epiphany. And Epiphany, we know, just simply means showing or shining forth. And so it follows then that during Epiphany, we consider God's radiance and glory. And we open our hearts to experience God's light. Epiphany's journey, my glory, my light, says God, I give to you. Through the prophet, God speaks hope and liberation and light, not just to any people at any time, but to the people of Israel who are in the darkness of exile. There's a backstory here, and it's one that I'll give you the short version of, just so you can kind of empathize and see the plight of the people to whom Isaiah writes. Now you'll remember that God and Moses delivered the people of Israel from bondage in Egypt, made a covenant with them, brought them through the wilderness to the promised land, and there they became a nation. They built a temple to Yahweh, the deliverer who had set them free. They stayed there. Over the course of hundreds of years, the nation of Israel celebrated victories and suffered defeat. They went through prophets and kings when they had forgot where they came from and left God behind. These cutting voices of prophets called them to return to the ways of love and justice. We've done through the Sundays of Advent and Christmas. We heard this morning the voice of God through the prophet Isaiah, who says this: "Thus says God, the Holy One who created the heavens and stretched them out." In other words, this isn't just some God. This is the God who spoke light into being. "I have called you and have taken you by the hand and kept you. I have given you as a covenant to the people, as a light to the nations, to open eyes that are blind, to bring out from the prison those who sit in darkness." My journey is guided by that star, that holy light, the light of God that shone over and through the infant Jesus. This theme of light and light's identification with the essence and presence of God is a theme throughout the entire Scriptures, as well as in the thoughts of all the world's religions. Testimony, perhaps, that this divine light, what we experience as light and enlightenment, is at the heart of all that is.